There is a garden, there is a city, and there's a kingdom of God. And it is beautiful, and he is bringing it right now into our midst.
One of the things that's been resonating with me throughout this series is just the significance of relational leadership. My leadership is going to be the most effective when it's being flowed out from my relationship with God. And when I have a personal relationship with those that I'm serving, with those that I'm leading, that's when my leadership is going to be the most effective.
I love the example that Jesus sets with his leadership. In Mark, he says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many."
As I've been listening to the sermon series, I've been reminded of my younger years in leadership, and so much of it was about passion and drive and being all out for the gospel, for making a difference in people's lives. As I'm thinking about this now as an older leader in midlife, I'm thinking through how to invest in the next generation. And it is a passion of mine now to make a difference in the lives of that next generation of leaders.
Previously, I've been really reluctant to even think of myself as a leader because it seemed like it was like a prideful or boastful way to view myself. But God is reminding me that I should lead from a place of humility, and serving like Jesus is just another way that I can steward the resources that God has given me as a leader.
Well, good morning, Living Word. And welcome to those of you who are watching by live stream. Not a bad choice, so you didn't have to get wet today. But for those of you who did, thank you for being here. But again, welcome to live stream, and also to those who are over in our Life Center. We are finishing up our final week on the leadership series, and we had asked the 4 women leaders, just for the men and women who are given wonderful leadership here at our church, what are some of the things that they've been learning, and I hope you've enjoyed their reminiscing about that. And as we've been having conversations with lots of other folks, been very wonderful to see the different seeds of ideas and new practices that God has been giving to so many of us. And we are very excited about the next series that begins next week, but I've got to wrap up our series today, and what I'm going to wind up doing is, even though we've been talking all along about the Jesus way of leadership, today I want to try as best I can to dive into 4 of the things that I've been processing a lot, thinking a lot, been reminded about, and want to go much deeper in from the Gospels and some stuff that Jesus has been saying to us. The first thing that I'm really increasingly aware is that Jesus is inviting ordinary people into his presence. And when he invites ordinary people into his presence, when they are in his presence, something really significant begins to take place. My mom, when she was late 60s, maybe even early 70s, she was having a revitalization of her faith. She had been a churchgoer for her whole life, but things started getting really deep and really meaningful for her after my dad died, and Mom was in her mid-60s when Dad died. Now, what was really interesting about my mom is that her whole life she had been a servant. She was full of love and compassion. Mom's vocation was that of a nurse. And she was a visiting nurse, which meant that she was going all throughout the county to bring health care to those people who couldn't easily get into the metropolis of York for care. And back in the 60s and early 70s, York County was a little bit different than it is today. Things were a little more primitive at some of the places, and Mom especially had Southern York County, and I think Mom had been on every single road that exists in Southern York County. And there were times when the roads were so bad that cars couldn't navigate. Mom would have to park her car and walk a distance to get to the place where she had to bring nursing care for somebody who needed it. And as a kid, I just remember Mom talking at the supper table every now and then about some of the things that had been going on. And after my brother and I got away from the table, Mom and Dad kept on talking longer, and I would hear sometimes running around just a few more things. But just the sense that Mom had a vocation of love and service through her nursing career for people who needed her help. So she was always that way. I mean, that's just who my mom was. But about age 70, I started having different conversations with Mom. Mom was just talking to me about the things she'd do. I'd pop over and say, hey, Mom, what's going on? And next thing I know, Mom's talking about, well, she's doing this for this group, and she's organizing this meeting, and she's gathering these folks together, and she's getting this speaker lined up, and she's taking this group out to do this. And I just realized that my mom, at age 70, who had been loving and serving her whole life, at age 70, she was becoming a leader. That was so cool for me to see. Ordinary people, her faith was flourishing, and she was being used by God in a whole new way. When Jesus called the disciples, he didn't look around and say, who are the most impressive people right here in these neighborhoods, the most credentials, the most degrees, the most experience, the most status, who are those folks? They're exactly who I want on my team. That's not what Jesus did. He looked around, he found really ordinary people with all kinds of flaws and weaknesses, and he invited them to come into his presence. You know, many decades later, the Apostle Paul, as he is reflecting on this practice of Jesus and looking at what's been going on ever since, he winds up talking to the Corinthians. He says this, brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. There were a few, but not many. Not many were influential, a few, but not many. Not many were of noble birth, a few, but not many. Instead, God chose ordinary, foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the ordinary, weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the ordinary, lowly things of the world and the despised things and the things that are not, that he might nullify the things that are. I mean, God just is always going out and looking for ordinary people, really ordinary people, to fill them with his love, to turn them into servants, to turn them into leaders. In the book of Acts, there's this preaching going on very early. You know, Pentecost has happened. Things are in a tumultuous transformation in the city of Jerusalem. And here come Peter and John, and they are preaching. They are preaching with power. They are seeing results that are coming as they wind up preaching. And some of the religious leadership establishment, the people who were of noble birth, the people who were influential, the people who did have credentials and status and all that, they come. And when they see the courage of Peter and James, then they realize, now look at what they realized. These are unschooled, ordinary people. And they were astonished. How are ordinary, unschooled people doing what they're doing? Oh, they took note. They've been with Jesus. That's the key. They had been with Jesus. Jesus invites ordinary people into his presence so he can do beautiful, wonderful things in their lives. You know, we are always overestimating the power of big. Let's have the big event, and we think it's going to change everything, and it doesn't. Let's go after this flashy experience thinking that's going to solve the problems, and it doesn't. And we're looking for these heroic, charismatic, brave, bold leaders who are going to solve all our problems. And we are always overestimating the power of the big and flashy. And we underestimate the power of the small, the power of the slow, steady accumulation of random acts of kindness, of countless deeds of love and service done by ordinary people that just swell into an ocean of momentum. In other words, we underestimate who we are and what God can do through us. We're always underestimating who we are and think it's going to be up to somebody else to do something great and lasting. Do you know, in the first century or two, when Christianity was growing, it's still small, but it's growing. And they're moving throughout the Roman Empire, away from Jerusalem where they started, into the Roman Empire. And the Roman emperors were threatened by Christianity. Now, they weren't threatened by a couple of spectacular Christian leaders. There were a few, but the Roman emperors weren't threatened by those individuals. The Roman emperors were threatened by this mass of ordinary followers who were just going everywhere in the name of Jesus. They were loving and serving the poor. They were taking care of widows. They were looking after the orphans. They were visiting those who were in prison. They were taking care of those who were diseased and dying, sometimes at great personal risk and sacrifice. They were the ones that the Roman emperors were scared to death of, and they were well sure to be scared of those people because those people turned the Roman Empire upside down. Ordinary followers of Jesus who were showing common decency to everybody, who were filled with beautiful compassion and energized with the spiritual vitality that they would stop at anything. And don't you think that's what we need today? Look, we don't need a handful of spectacular leaders who are changing the world. What we need is for the ordinary mass followers of Jesus doing what has always worked, countless acts of love and service. And when we do that, that's going to be the leadership that changes our world, our nation, and our community of York. And that's what we are all being invited into by Jesus. That's this first thing I've been really soaking in during this series. Christian leadership is ordinary people empowered with an extraordinary God. Here's the second thing I've been thinking about from Jesus. And that is Jesus redirects all of us, no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, he redirects us into his missional purposes. In John chapter 15, he talks about the vine and the branches, and he wants us to bear fruit, and he talks about pruning so we bear fruit. But when it gets down to verse 8, he winds up saying, "This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit." And as you're bearing much fruit, as you're doing all these things, these acts of love and kindness that are making a difference, that's when you're going to show the world that, hey, these are the followers and disciples of Jesus. And then a couple verses later in verse 16, "You didn't choose me for this. I came looking for you. I chose you ordinary people, you ordinary disciples. Now let's just go and bear fruit. Let's go and make a difference with love and service that really lasts and reverberates through our region and down through time." And Jesus is redirecting you and I into his missional purposes. We talked about this phrase, tikkun olam, a wonderful Jewish idea that is really at the heart of what Jesus' ministry was all about. It means repairing what is broken. It means reversing the fall. It means renewing the world. Repairing what is broken. Man, I was talking to a friend this week, and he just said, "Brian, there is so much hurt and pain out there." Haven't we experienced that as a community again just this past week? The Northeastern School District in particular is just going through a crisis with the death of a student. The Dallastown School District and community, the death of a student. I mean, there's just so much pain out there. And we are called to be those who repair and heal and reverse and renew all that is broken and all that is wrong. Tikkun olam. And for those people who get that they're being redirected into missional purposes, they have a great sense that they have personal responsibility. They say, if not me, then who? Man, I would love for you guys in every situation this week, wherever you are, just thinking wherever you are, say, hey, listen, if not me, then who else is going to do it? If not me, who else is going to repair what's broken in this system? If not me, who else is going to reverse all the damages that sin has done to my place of work? If not me, who else is going to renew what needs fixed and changed and healed and upgraded? If not me, who's going to do that? And when you and I wind up understanding this sense of personal responsibility, we are well on our way to being tikkun olam, repairers of the world. Now, then there's a second idea involved in tikkun olam, and that is not only personal responsibility, but social responsibility. Yes, I am my brother's keeper. Yes, I am my sister's keeper. What Jesus came along and did for all of us is he just so radically redefined the question, who's my brother and who's my sister? The way Jesus redefined it, what was the answer? Everyone is my brother, everyone is my sister, everyone is my neighbor. Not just the people I care about, not just the few that are close to me. The stranger is your brother and sister. The enemy is your brother and sister. Maybe the stranger and the enemy are especially your brother and sister. So those people who are filled with the spirit of tikkun olam, repairing the world, they just have a great sense of responsibility for everybody that comes into their life orbit. But there's a third idea with this repairing the world. And that is that we have this kind of supernatural, mystical, spiritual awareness that we are the containers for something much greater than ourselves. We are the vehicles and we are the conduits of grace, love, truth, mercy, beauty, glory, majesty. We are the containers of the presence of God making his way through the world. God is dwelling in you and I so that we can do all that his missional purposes require. We realize we are possessed by God. And so that's what's involved with this whole understanding of tikkun olam. This is why you and I go out there and we wind up repairing the world. And so what I'm understanding from Jesus is that Christian leadership is all about this long, faithful obedience concerning the purposes of God. In Christian leadership, meaning, purpose, calling, vocation, destiny, legacy, they all converge and make something beautiful. And it is to be sustained for the long haul of our lives. So therefore, this leads me to the third thing that Jesus has imprinting on me, and that is that he wants to change you and I from the inside out. Now, what I've discovered through the many years of leading and trying to mentor others is most leadership failures are not because of massive competency failure. Most egregious mistakes from leaders are not because they lack competency and skill. Now, sometimes that does indeed happen. Sometimes leaders get promoted to the positions of incompetence. They just don't have the ability, that they had here, but now they're here and they just don't have the ability. So yes, sometimes there's a lack of skills that lead to leadership failure, but most of the time, that's not the problem. Most of the time, it's the inner world is out of whack. We put so much emphasis on skills and we've neglected so much the inner life of the leader. So we have these leaders that are monstrously good in skills and horribly bad internally. And that's where most failures come from. A week or so ago, we were doing a staff training. We just said to staff, hey, would you mind just sharing with our congregation, what is it that you look for in a leader? Just listen to the kind of things they were saying that they look for in good leadership.
One of the most important things to me in leaders is for them to be a servant leader and reflect the character of Jesus in that they live their lives to love God and love others.
And can point out my flaws so I can get myself better.
Characterize integrity and humility combined.
I want them to actually do what they say they're going to do.
Can guide me with wisdom and supports me where I'm at and what I'm doing.
I think of someone who's gentle, someone who's humble.
And along with that is the issue of trust. Can I trust them, and will they trust me?
I think of not only someone who has vision, who has great ideas, but also someone who is able to get the job done.
One of the things that immediately comes to mind is someone who exhibits what it looks like to have real faith in the real world.
Values input from the members of their team and who also leads by example.
Authentic and honest.
A leader that sees me for who I truly am.
A quality that I admire in a leader is a servant heart.
One who has a heart for those around them, the world around them.
And most importantly, to not be afraid to fail.
Isn't that great? By the way, we have a really good staff, don't we? We have a really good staff. Not only are they looking for those things and the leaders they will follow, they are looking to be that kind of leader so you would be willing to follow and work and serve and love alongside them. But did you hear what just about everybody was talking about? I mean, they're not looking for these massive competencies. I mean, we need them. They're important, but we're looking for something deeper and underneath. Now, here's what happens. In our culture, we put so much focus on people getting better, learning more skills, and actually that's the easiest thing to learn. And then slowly we pick up a couple of mindsets and fundamental beliefs, but at some point we really stop growing in our core understandings of things. And what we discover is that our character is lagging even further behind this formation of virtue, this creating of emotional health, the social intelligence inside of us, and then this thing called relationship with God, the spiritual dynamic from which all good things flow. We just neglect those things in our culture. Now, you can only do that for so long. So look, what's going to happen when you neglect the foundation, when you neglect what's down there beneath? Well, wait for it. Wait for it. Here's what happens. Now, that happened in my life. Happened in my leadership. I spent so much time building the skill sets of leaders because there was so much hard work to be done. And I just need to get better and better at what I was doing. And yet no matter how good I got, because I was not attending to the mindsets, to the character and virtue and the deep intimacy with God, there came a point when my skills just came crashing down and I was just so frustrated and so disappointed and so wounded and so burned out and so everything that I just said, do I even want to continue on? See, this stuff's just happening everywhere. And what happened is God said, well, Brian, this will be taken to, in the Bible they call it the wilderness experience, where he wound up kind of getting the spiritual life in order and getting character reframed and getting the mindsets that I needed. But see, that's what Jesus does. Here's what we see in the Gospels. We see it with the disciples. Jesus starts from the ground level. He starts to talk about spiritual life and who God is and what life with God is like. And as he's talking about this life with God begins to change the character or the virtue, the interior essence of these disciples. And Jesus is giving them the essential mindsets that they're going to need. And while all these things are going on, yes, he's teaching them skills. But what was most important is the bottom stuff. And then what happens when this stuff is in place, for the rest of our life, you can get better and better at skills. You're just going to grow monstrously good at the things you do, and it's going to be sustained because you have those other things that are in place. That's what I've been hearing from Jesus as I've been in this particular series. And if I would say it this way, Christian leadership is all about the renewal of your inner world so your outer world can be sustained and you can finish well. And that's why we're here. And that's why we do everything we do in our leadership and our spiritual formation. We just want to help you guys get your inner world in order. Here's the last thing which I want to say. And that is that Jesus inspires me, and I hope he inspires you with his way. It is truly radical. It is refreshing, and it is renewing. About 2-3 weeks ago, Beck and I joined a bunch of the family, and we went down to West Virginia for my niece's white coat ceremony. Now, I didn't know what a white coat ceremony was. You guys know what a white coat ceremony is? Yeah, so it's when somebody who is just entering medical school gets their white coat, really, really cool ceremony. One of the early speakers was a graduate of the second class of students many decades earlier. So this person is a little bit older, and so there he's standing, and he winds up saying these words. They're so significant, I quickly jotted them down. As I am in the winter of my service, and you are entering the spring of yours. Wow, did I just, man, as I am in the late summer of my service. All right, as I'm in the early fall of my service, and looking out to all these possibilities, as you are entering the spring of yours. Just to go back to what we've been talking about all along through these series, what Aaron Anderson in particular brought forth last week. It's like we who are in our late summer and early fall and winter of our time of love and service and leadership, we have such a responsibility to pass it on to those who are in the spring of theirs. And that just filled the entire auditorium. But then he went on and said something even more striking. What we do for ourselves dies with us, but what we do for others lives on forever. Extraordinary. That's the gospel. What we do for ourselves dies with us, but what we do in the name of Jesus with great love and service lives on forever. That's exactly what Jesus was communicating to his disciples in Mark chapter 10. It might be my favorite passage in the Gospels. I mean, this passage in the Gospel is everything we've been talking about the meaning of leadership, which is the use of power and authority, and good leadership, which is the right use of power and authority for the flourishing of others, and bad leadership is the misuse and abuse of power and authority for the well-being of the leader. I mean, it's all contained in this particular passage. And James and John, the sons of thunder, come to Jesus and say, hey, Jesus, we have a request. We'd like to be number 1 and number 2 in your kingdom. We want to have the most significant positions of power and authority in your kingdom. Will you do that for us? And when the other 10 heard that, they were indignant. Why were they indignant? Because James and John, I can't believe you don't understand the way of Jesus. Is that why they were indignant? No. They were indignant because James and John had the idea first. They beat Jesus to the punch in that request. So what we wind up doing is Jesus calls them together and says, now listen to all this language of leadership. You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Now here is one of the most definitive either-or statements you will ever read in the Gospels. Not so with you. That's not how we do it in my Father's kingdom. That's not the way of power and authority. That's not the way of leadership in God's beautiful kingdom. Here's God's way. Whoever wants to be great, you've got to be a servant. And if you really want to be great, not only do you need to be a servant, but you need to act like you're a slave to those who need you. And in fact, you have to be willing to suffer and sacrifice just as I, the Son of Man, will offer my life as a ransom for the flourishing of the world, and by which Jesus was talking about the cross. So it's all boiled down to in these 6 weeks of good leadership, bad leadership. You know, the work that leaders do, the heart of leadership. It all boils down to this. Jesus has set the way of service and sacrifice and suffering. That's God's way of leadership. That's the way that God has always made a beautiful transformation, a repairing of the world that he so loves. And so then Jesus in John chapter 20, verse 21 says this, as my Father has sent me, I'm sending you. So go out there and love and serve and suffer a little and sacrifice a little for the flourishing of the world.